Syracuse basketball has reached out to Miami transfer Paul Djobet, and he could potentially check one box for this team next season.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome in a Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Of course, we are always free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, Syracuse basketball has expressed interest in Miami transfer guard or forward Paul Djobet. We'll talk about whether or not this would move the needle in a positive direction for Syracuse as far as making the NCAA tournament, the elephant in the room. Plus, we'll discuss Paul Djobet's possible fit in Syracuse's rotation. But first, we're going to start the podcast talking about what you need to know about Paul Djobet as a player and what he could possibly bring to Syracuse basketball. All that and more here on this edition of Locked On Syracuse. But before we get to everything, this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Syracuse basketball does not appear to be done adding in the transfer portal. When they added Cincinnati forward Tyler Betsey just a couple of days ago, I mentioned that I don't think Syracuse basketball is done because they have 12 players under scholarship now on the roster. And, well, the NCAA now permits 15 scholarship players. So while they may not fill all 15, it's likely that Syracuse adds at least one or two more players in the transfer portal. And so earlier today, Monday, May 5th, we found out that Syracuse has expressed or reached out to another transfer portal player. According to Sam Kaiser, 24/7 High School Hoops over on Twitter, Syracuse is among the teams that reached out to Miami transfer Paul Djobet, and the other teams that have reached out to him include Louisville, Clemson, Missouri, Georgia Tech, Cal, Utah State, Nevada, High Point, and Oregon State. Let's go over the bio and the stats of Paul Djobet and what he could possibly bring to Syracuse basketball. Djobet is 6'7". He's 195 pounds, and he's got 2 more years of college eligibility remaining. Again, with the eligibility, while it's certainly nice that Syracuse is targeting players and getting players that have multiple years of college eligibility, with the exception being Nate Kingz from Oregon State, it really does not matter because if Syracuse does not win next season, all the players are probably gone anyway. But if they do win next season, hey, they got multiple years of eligibility, so we could see them back for another season, right? So that's the positive way of looking at the years of eligibility here. Last season, Paul Djobet, he played in 28 games for Miami. He averaged about 16 minutes per game, 5.5 points, 2.5 rebounds, 47% field goal shooting, and 38% three-point shooting on about 1 attempt per game. Oh, by the way, I should mention that Paul Djobet tied a season high with 13 points against Syracuse last season. He went 5 of 7 from the field, 3 of 3 from the three-point line. It just goes to show you how pretty much everyone around the nation ate against Syracuse basketball. You play against Syracuse basketball, that probably added $50,000 to your NIL because you were going to have a good game, which increased your averages, which, increases your NIL. Can he shoot? Can he defend? If you recall earlier this offseason, we did an entire podcast going over, it was at the time just a few transfer portal targets, and we analyzed whether or not the targets could shoot the ball well or if they could defend. And if they really couldn't do either, well, were they just damn good? Are they just so good to the point where it really doesn't matter if they aren't necessarily great shooters or they're not necessarily great defenders? Actually, that's Nathan George. Nathan George averaged 12 points and 7 assists last year at Georgia Tech. He's not a great outside shooter, although he is getting better from the three-point line. And he's not a great defender either. Having said that, 12 points and 7 assists, leading the conference in assists last season, you're pretty damn good. So I think we can make an exception to a guy like Nathan George as far as not necessarily being the greatest shooter or not necessarily being the greatest defender. But when it comes to other transfers, guys who aren't in the top 50 or top 75 overall, you would hope that they have one or two of those attributes. It's kind of important. So that's why we asked, can a player shoot or can a player defend? Can he shoot? Kind of. Paul Djobet can kind of shoot. In 2 seasons in college basketball, he shoots over 39% from the three-point line. I think we can all agree that over 39%, close to 40%, is a really, really strong three-point percentage, especially from a guy, which we'll talk about later on in the show, projects as more of a depth piece for Syracuse basketball if they go out and actually get a guy like Paul Djobet. However, he only shoots, ready for this, exactly 1.2 three-point attempts per game in his 2 seasons in college basketball. There is a reason why I am more excited for a guy like Nate Kingz coming from Oregon State. And the reason why is not just because he shoots nearly 45% from the three-point line. It's the amount of attempts that he did it on. Nate Kingz shot 45% from the three-point line on over 4 attempts per game. So that sample size increases, and yet he still was connecting at such a high efficiency rate. With Paul Djobet, 39% from the three-point line for your career, I can't deny it. That's a really good percentage. But on just about 1 three-point attempt per game. So he doesn't necessarily get that green check of can he shoot? But he also, I'm not going to give him an X either for can he shoot. It's more of I'm going to give him a yellow check mark. He can shoot. It's just on limited attempts. So if he comes to Syracuse next year and shoots at a same rate, but maybe it's 2 to 3 three-point attempts per game, well, then he gets a lot, he becomes a lot more valuable for Syracuse basketball. Next up, can Paul Djobet defend? No. Paul Djobet does not project as a really strong defender for Syracuse basketball. If you recall, there was one team in the ACC a year ago that had a worse defense than Syracuse basketball. I know it's hard to believe given how bad Syracuse basketball was on defense last year, but there was someone worse. And that was the Miami Hurricanes. They let up over 80 points a game a year ago. And Paul Djobet, he did not exactly help. I wouldn't say that he hurt in that regard, but he didn't exactly make them better. He averaged a half steal a game, 0.3 blocks a game, and he had Nevin Maya defensive rating of negative 1.12. That means if there are 9 average Division I players on the floor and Paul Djobet is the 10th player, the team with Paul Djobet going up against 5 average D1 players would be over 1 point worse defensively per 100 possessions. It should be noted that he was graded out as a better defender in 2024, and that's in part because Miami was a better team defensively. They still weren't good. They were 11th in the ACC out of 15 teams in 2024, but if you look at the point total disparity, 2025, they allowed about 80 points per game defensively. The year prior, it was about 73 points allowed defensively. And Djobet, his rating was positive 0.68 on defense, and that was good for 6th on the team. So basically, here's the deal with a guy like Paul Djobet as far as his defense. He has been, over the past couple of seasons, a meaty defender relative to his team, and his team hasn't exactly been good defensively. So is Paul Djobet a good defender? No. Can he kind of shoot? Yeah. What do you all think? Is this a move that you would like Syracuse basketball to make? And we'll get to it later on in the show, but do you think that this is the type of move that could move the needle in a positive direction for Syracuse basketball? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. Now, coming up, he would have an interesting fit in this rotation. So stick with me here on Locked On Syracuse, because we're going to talk about Paul Djobet's possible role with Syracuse if he were to commit. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400 plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. If you need help with an order, Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free TradeMaster program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage, and now it's your turn. Join the TradeMaster program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Once again, Syracuse basketball is one of the teams that have recently expressed interest in Miami transfer guard and forward Paul Djobet. We just talked about him as a player and why he's kind of a fit for Syracuse in regards to he can shoot the ball a little, but he is not necessarily an elite defender. Now let's discuss his possible role in Syracuse's rotation. And I find the timing of the report from Sam Kaiser very, very interesting, because this is coming after Syracuse basketball added Tyler Betsey, a small forward from Cincinnati. If you recall, that was a move that they made just a couple of days ago, and he projects to be the backup small forward for Syracuse basketball, right behind Nate Kingz from Oregon State. And just to tease a future podcast, which is actually going to be coming tomorrow, Tuesday, May 6th, we're going to have on 24/7 Sports Syracuse insider Mike McAllister, and I will ask him about Paul Djobet and whether or not they're going to maybe get Paul Djobet, and also that includes Tyler Betsey, who they already got, or if this was one of those situations where it was one or the other. Syracuse chose Tyler Betsey, and that's that with a guy like Paul Djobet. So I'll definitely ask him about it. But as of right now, maybe Syracuse does, in fact, add both players. Let's go over the team depth with a guy like Paul Djobet. If he were to commit to Syracuse, given that he is 6'7", I think he would be a small forward for Syracuse, but technically, he's listed as a guard, so he could probably play the two as well, as one of the bigger two guards in the ACC, right? The shooting guard spot with a guy like Paul Djobet is pretty easy to figure out. You got J.J. Starling as your starter. Duh. You got Kyan Anthony as your backup. Duh. Paul Djobet is your 3. And then Bryce Zephyr, the Montana State transfer. Again, like I said so many times on the mini podcast, we talked about him earlier on this offseason. He's more of a roster filler for Syracuse. And if you get a guy like Paul Djobet, that just shows you even more that a guy like Bryce Zephyr probably isn't going to see the floor unless it's an emergency or it's at the end of a game and you need someone to play when Syracuse is up or down 20 with a minute to go. So why not a guy like Bryce Zephyr, right? Then you got the small forward rotation here. And unless Syracuse makes another big splash in the transfer portal, and we could talk about one that they could technically make coming up later on in this show, because a certain guy just became available again, has a Syracuse connection, you might be able to connect the dots with what I just said. But I don't think they will make another big splash, particularly at that position, small forward. So it's probably going to be Nate Kingz. Nate Kingz from Oregon State, who shot nearly 45% from the three-point line, is going to be your starting small forward on opening night for Syracuse basketball, unless there's some sort of injury or someone just takes the job for him in training camp, which I guess could happen. Your backup, Tyler Betsey, the Cincinnati forward, And then Paul Djobet would be your 3. And Aaron Womack, the 3-star recruit, I don't think he's going to see that much time on the floor next season, more of a developmental guy. He would be the 4th small forward on Syracuse's roster. I'll be honest with you, I don't know who right now is better between Tyler Betsey and Paul Djobet. I think Tyler Betsey certainly has more upside because he's a former top 50 high school recruit in the 2024 recruiting class. And he would probably begin the season as the backup small forward to a guy like Nate Kingz. And it should be noted, Paul Djobet, he does not have the same pedigree as Tyler Betsey. He was a 3-star recruit out of high school, and he's also a 3-star rated transfer. Tyler Betsey, high-end 4-star recruit out of high school, and also still a 4-star transfer somehow, but he is a 4-star transfer technically. So there's more upside with Tyler Betsey. However, if Betsey doesn't take a significant step forward in his development and he remains a similar player to what he was last season, which was 32% from the three-point line, 27% from the three-point line in conference play, not exactly a good defender either, then I could see a guy like Paul Djobet becoming the backup small forward because at least, even in a short sample, he has shot the ball well from the three-point line, nearly 40% for his career. So Betsey offers more upside as your backup small forward, but Paul Djobet might be a little bit more seasoned, a little bit more proven for that spot. What do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below. Who do you think would be the backup small forward for Syracuse next season? Would it be Tyler Betsey or would it be Paul Djobet? Comment your thoughts in the comment section below. And now coming up, the elephant in the room. Would a guy like Paul Djobet move the needle for Syracuse basketball as far as making the NCAA tournament? That's coming up next on Locked On Syracuse. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment? It's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for making it to this point of the podcast. I hope it means that you enjoy the podcast. And trust me, folks, we still have plenty to talk about here on this edition of Locked On Syracuse. We're going to talk about whether or not Paul Djobet moves the needle for Syracuse basketball. But before we do that, since you made it to this point of the podcast, if you could just do me a favor, tell one or two of your closest friends about the Locked On Syracuse podcast. It helps the channel grow, reach all Syracuse Orange fans. And if you haven't done so already, if you could hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications, that would be amazing. And thank you all so much to those who continue to subscribe to Locked On Syracuse each and every day. We are actually closing in on nearly 4,000 subscribers. So thank you all so much who subscribe every day. Let's now get to the question. Does Paul Djobet, the Miami transfer, move the needle for Syracuse basketball as far as making the NCAA tournament? You know, that elephant in the room, the make or break season coming up for Syracuse, right? To me, best case, he could. I'll tell you how in just a moment. But as of right now, with a guy like Paul Djobet, I don't see how this is anything more than a depth move for Syracuse basketball. So I don't think it really moves the needle all that much as far as making the NCAA tournament. However, there is some upside with a guy like Paul Djobet, and it has to do with his shooting. The fact that he is a 39% three-point shooter in college. Yes, on only about one attempt per game. But like I talked about earlier on in the podcast. If Paul Djobet comes to Syracuse, and they maybe give him a little bit more of a role than what he had in Miami, and he shoots, I think best case would be three-point attempts per game, and he can convert at a similar efficiency, 39%. Well, that slightly moves the needle in a positive direction for Syracuse basketball. He then would become a weapon for Syracuse potentially off the bench. So there is some upside here with Paul Djobet's shooting, but as of right now, it's more of just a depth piece if Syracuse were to get him. So I don't think he really moves the needle all that much. And I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below if you think that Paul Djobet would move the needle in a positive direction for Syracuse basketball. To me, I see the upside with him. If they give him more open shots, just more shots in general. But as of right now, no. Now, I will tell you about someone who I think would move the needle for Syracuse basketball, and he's back on the market. Desmond Claude, 6'5", 210-pound guard from USC. He was brought up earlier this offseason, unprompted, by 24/7 Sports Syracuse insider Mike McAllister when we were going over Syracuse's transfer portal targets. And he wasn't even in the transfer portal yet. And he was bringing him up as a possible point guard option for Syracuse basketball. And there's a big connection here. His mother played for Syracuse basketball. And he's averaged about 16 points per game in each of the past 2 seasons over at Xavier and at USC. So this is a highly productive player that is in the transfer portal who has a direct connection with Syracuse basketball. However, Syracuse basketball has already landed a transfer portal point guard. They seized the opportunity to go out and get Georgia Tech's Nathan George, which, by the way, was the correct move for Syracuse basketball. Because at the time they got Nathan George, it wasn't a certainty that Desmond Claude was going to enter the portal. In fact, he did not enter the portal until a few hours before it closed. So it was no guarantee that he was going to enter the portal. And so Syracuse was like, you know what? We have the opportunity to just lock in Nathan George right now. Why are we going to wait on a player who might not become available? And if he does become available, he would be highly sought after, and there would be a ton of competition to get him. So there's no guarantee you even get him if he enters the portal. So they smartly went out and got Nathan George as a preemptive strike. And I'll be honest with you all, when they got Nathan George and then Desmond Claude enters the portal, I didn't think that Syracuse would have much of a chance. And by the way, I still don't think that Syracuse has much of a chance to land a guy like Desmond Claude. But here's the deal. It seemed like a foregone conclusion. He was going to go and play for the Florida Gators. That's where all the insiders were saying that's where he's going. It's like the two are flirting, the two are dancing. You just have a feeling that they're going to end up together, that this is some match made in heaven for Florida and Desmond Claude. And then there's a report earlier today, Monday, May 5th, and it kind of surprised me. Florida is no longer in play for Desmond Claude. So that's out. He is back on the open market. Is it realistic? No. I'll be honest with you. I'm very blunt on this podcast. If you've been following along this podcast for a while, you probably are pretty aware of that by now, that I will speak my mind. So I don't think that he is a realistic option. The number one reason is because I don't think Syracuse has the NIL to afford him. Now, we don't actually know this because it's not public information. But just seeing the players that Syracuse is kind of connected to at this point in the transfer portal, none of them are headline players. You don't see Syracuse being one of the teams interested in RJ Lewis or PJ Haggerty, who's going to NC State anyway, or Darian Williams. Even though those would be awesome additions, or even like a guy like Jameer Watkins. Even though those would be great options, I don't think Syracuse is going to land any one of them. And a guy like Desmond Claude, he ain't going to come cheap. So that's number one. I don't think Syracuse has the NIL to afford him. And number two, you would have to move him off the ball. I think you would still have Nathan George as the point guard. I think then J.J. Starling becomes the 2, and then Desmond Claude, who has the size to do it at 6'5", 210. He could be the starting 3, but it is not necessarily the greatest fit for Syracuse basketball. He could probably find somewhere else to be the starting point guard there. Having said that, if the money's right, the money's right. So it may not necessarily matter. But overall, Desmond Claude would have, if Syracuse were to add Desmond Claude, they have a tournament team on paper. Like, no question in my mind. That is a tournament team on paper. Your top end talent would be Desmond Claude, Nathan George, J.J. Starling, and Donnie Freeman. How many teams in college basketball would have a better 4 players than that? I'm not going to sit here and say like only 5 or 10 teams, but I think it would be top 25 easily in the country with those 4 players. And then you have Nate Kingz, and there's less pressure on Sadiq White and Kyan Anthony, and you could start seeing the pieces really come together. The bottom line is if you add a guy like Desmond Claude or one of the other top transfers that's available, Adrian Autry really has no excuse, to the point where if Adrian Autry cannot coach that team to the NCAA tournament, he probably just shouldn't be a head coach at any level of basketball anymore. He'd probably just be better suited as an assistant, which for some coaches, that's just the way it is. They don't work out as head coaches, but they're very fine assistants. Again, I don't think it's necessarily realistic that Syracuse all of a sudden will now become a player for Desmond Claude, even though that there is a connection with his mother. But it would be nice, let's put it that way, if Syracuse could add a guy like Desmond Claude. As far as what is coming up on Locked On Syracuse in the future, I've mentioned this a couple of times here on the podcast. Tomorrow morning is when I'm going to release the podcast because, breaking news can happen at any time. And Mike McAllister is supposed to join the podcast later this evening, Monday, May 5th. He's going to be on the podcast, a Syracuse insider for 24/7 Sports, and we're going to discuss the next moves for Syracuse basketball and for Syracuse football in the transfer portal. Following that podcast, myself and Neil Adler from Inside the Loud House, we are going to do a 2-part podcast reacting to some of the statements from Syracuse basketball's State of the Union address that they gave on the official Syracuse Orange YouTube channel, which I highly recommend that you all check out, and feel free to leave your thoughts in the comment section below on that State of the Union address. Thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. And for your second listen, check out the Locked On Portal Show. Recruiting expert for football, Brian Smith. He's got the latest rumors and signings each and every day. And you can be the most informed fan on the rapid changes to the college football landscape by checking out the Locked On Portal podcast. You can find it on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this podcast, be sure to hit that like button. If you really enjoy the podcast, be sure to hit subscribe. Tell all your friends about Locked On Syracuse. And don't forget, you're going to want to hit that bell button and turn on those notifications so you know right away when I am dropping the next podcast. And I will see you all again soon.